forwarding that recommendation, the layout plan to the planning board, getting their recommendation, and coming back to the selectmen, hopefully at the next meeting, for vote to adopt the layout plan, and then we can put it on the agenda for town meeting vote. And that way, once the streets are legally accepted, we can then, if we get the grant funding, which we're going to apply for over the winter, start the engineering for the streets next spring, and then in the next round, hopefully, get the money to actually do the construction. It could be road improvement, drainage improvement, sidewalks, all of those things that we did on the other streets as well.
Questions?
It appears from looking at this that there's a house in the middle of Washington Street with a new way. Am I wrong?
There's a house in the middle, maybe Lisa could speak to right there, plan was here. I know there are some encroachments.
I don't, correct me again if I'm wrong, I don't know if this is a new layout. It's the original layout that was never adopted properly. Is that correct?
So these are Lands Court Streets, so these are what exists. So what you're seeing is what exists. So there's a lot of encroachments in this area, and we started doing the survey. We've now identified a lot of those encroachments. So I have detailed encroachment plans at our Citizens Advisory Committee meetings. We've been discussing this with the people that live down there, and we're going to have individual meetings with all of the abutters to figure out what we can do in regards to some of this encroachment. Some of the encroachments will be easier to rectify, others won't. But this purpose helps us to get to the next step of accepting the road layout. So we're not looking to do anything more than just accept what we all believe is through the land court plan as the streets, and then there will be issues like that we have to address.
That's your question.
I still don't know what's going to happen to this house.
Yeah. Me neither. There's some issues, so we have to meet individually with each property owner to figure out what can or can't be done.
This is the first step in the development issues.
Yeah, so we've started the surveying through some grant funds, and then we're hoping to go to February to apply for more funds for the engineering in order to try to rectify this, but we have to own the streets in order to get to the next step, or not own the streets, but have the streets properly laid out in order to get to the next step.
Okay, so, any other questions on this issue on President Streets?
The motion attached needs to be read
Is that the motion as prepared by council, I guess?
Yes.
Anyone want to read that as a motion? Or what's the pleasure of the board?
I move that the Board of Selectmen vote its intention to lay out Washington Street, Adams Street, Taft Street, Garfield Street, and Hay Street as townways as shown in the plan entitled Street Acceptance Plan in Salisbury, Mass, showing presidential streets dated September 19, 2014, prepared by Millennium Engineering, Inc. And that the Board of Selectmen forward the layout plan to the Planning Board for its comments and recommendations pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 41, 81G, and 81I.
Second. Motion made and second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Unanimous. I will, at the beginning of the meeting, I generally make an announcement, which I realized I neglected to make, and that is that this meeting is being held in accordance with the open meeting law of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I advise those present that the meeting is being recorded and broadcast live. Why that's pointed out to me is if anyone else intends to record a meeting, they have to notify the chairman of the board of that request. I would not deny the request, but I need the information as to if someone is obvious all of a sudden somebody wants to record it. I need that person to identify themselves.
Hi, I'm Catch of the Day Video News, Janet Aldrich. Here to record the meeting. Thank you.
Are you doing the entire meeting or just sections of the meeting?
I'm probably going to do the whole thing since I came in. Thank you.
Okay. I would tell you missed the first half hour.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is comments by visitors.
Hi, Paula Moore, 180 North End Boulevard.
Thank you.
I'm back on my water and sewer soapbox. I've been trying to fight this battle for over 6 years since I moved here. I volunteer.
Paula, I just interrupt you for a second. There is a scheduled hearing momentarily on water and sewer rates. If you wanted to address us on that issue, comments by visitors are intended for things that are not on the agenda.
My fear was I saw comments before that, and I didn't think you'd give us a chance to address it. So you're saying after it?
Under the public hearing, that's going to be the opportunity.
If you'll give me a chance to address it, I have no problem waiting.
Right, when we get to the public hearing, yes.
Thank you.
Comments by visitors for anything that is not on the agenda? Seeing none. It being 7:30 by somebody's clock, I will entertain a motion to open the public hearing on the proposed increased water and sewer rates.
So moved. Second.
Motion made and seconded to open the public hearing. The public hearing will go as follows, ladies and gentlemen. There will be a presentation that was put together by a consultant with the subcommittee, which consisted of 2 members of the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Condon and myself, the town manager, the finance director, the DPW director, and 2 citizens, Jim Gundero and Al Peterson. The presentation, we met in the meeting for approximately 10 months, reviewing water and sewer rates, expected deficits in both accounts at some point, and have come forward with a recommendation to the sewer and water commissioners. The presentation was made to the sewer and water commissioners last Monday in a workshop, and unfortunately our consultant had a conflict and couldn't be here for this public hearing. But if necessary, maybe if we have to proceed, we can bring him back at some other time if you need. So what we're going to do is first go through the presentation that was made to the board as a whole. And then after that presentation, ask you to hold your questions at the end of the presentation. We will open it up to questions from the public.
Mr. Chairman, did we vote on the motion to open the public hearing?
No, we didn't. You made it and I accepted it, so we will vote all in favor of opening the public hearing. Thank you. My conscience. Okay, so, Neil, would you?
So, as the chairman mentioned, our consultant, who is Chris Woodcock, who has 40 years of experience in water and sewer rate studies, and has done over 500 such studies in municipalities throughout the country, and in fact throughout the world, as he mentioned in his meeting with the board last week at the workshop, could not be here this evening. So in his stead, Andy Gould and I and Don Lebeck will walk the board and the public through the presentation that was made last week, and then open up to questions and comments from the board and from the public. I don't think I need to go through the first page, which is the membership of the committee. The chairman did that already. If we could start with the history page, just a little background. The town purchased the water company in September of 2001, as most people know. We did vote to establish an enterprise fund several years ago for water and sewer under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44. And so everybody understands what an enterprise fund is. It means that all of the money in revenues from water and sewer enterprise funds go into the water and sewer enterprise fund, which is separate from the town's general budget. And enterprise funds have to be completely self-supporting. So in other words, they cannot run a deficit that you have to fund then from the general fund and the taxpayers. The water revenues have to go into the water enterprise fund, and expenditures likewise, and the same thing with sewer. And as it says in the next slide, enterprise funds are required to cover all costs with the user fees, either water and or sewer. The scenario that the board identified based upon projections made by Mr. Gould last fall was that the water enterprise fund was projected to run into a deficit starting in fiscal year 2016 and future years, and that the sewer enterprise fund was projected to run into a deficit for fiscal year 2017 and future years. It was determined that both funds, enterprise funds reserves, were not sufficient for contingencies or major emergencies given these deficits, and that the bottom line was that we would need to look to increase rates. So that was the basis for which the chairman appointed the committee to begin work on this. We started last fall. We had approximately 8 meetings between last November and this August. The consultant, Mr. Woodcock, was selected through an RFP process promulgated by Don Levesque, the DPW director. Mr. Woodcock met with the committee 2 or 3 times. He produced an interim report, which was then poured over and discussed by the community, and then a final report was issued in August. And it was recommended that the committee recommend to the water and sewer rates the result of the report. So I'll let Andy, which is before you tonight, so I will let Andy walk through some of the numbers in terms of capital expenditures that are anticipated in deficits for the water and sewer enterprise fund in the foreseeable future.
I just wanted to make one minor correction. The forecast was done by both Don Levesque and myself, not just one.
Sorry, Don.
The water enterprise fund, both these funds are very capital intensive, so there's going to be a lot of major projects going on, and that's part of the reason the deficits are forecasted. And the water enterprise fund is $2.5 million in water infrastructure improvements and expansions over the next 5 years. Well construction, we have well 8 currently under construction. We've already got the town meeting to approve borrowing for the $1.5 million. And how far are you through that, Don? About halfway?
As far as the construction is concerned, we're just starting now.
We also have water meter replacements of $450,000. Those will be new meters so that the truck can drive by and read them without having to get up and go to each and every meter, which would save some money. Water tank repair and maintenance, it's the Bat Hill tank, correct?
Yeah, the both tanks of Bat Hill is first.
And then water main replacements, Don's been doing about $40,000–50,000 a year, making water main replacements over the last few years, and he wants to continue doing that. So it's approximately $50,000 a year over the next 5 years. For sewer, we have $8.9 million in infrastructure improvements. The big one is the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. We're kind of in a conundrum right now because we're waiting on the EPA and the state to tell us exactly what they want us to do. If it's a major project, it could be $12 million. Right now, we're trying to expand the outflow. Is that the way you put it, Tom?
Yep.
Expand the outflow, that would be the cheapest way, and so far, they're receptive to it. So that's right now we're expecting $6 million for that project. There's a townwide sewer design for $900,000. Part of that is the Lafayette Road project, which we've already appropriated. I believe it was $460,000 at last town meeting. There's a major computer and software system that lets the pump stations and the main wastewater treatment plant communicate with each other. It's $900,000. It's also referred to as SCADA. Central Lab sewer replacements for $600,000. Sludge removal for $200,000. Sand beds for $200,000. And vehicles for $100,000. And we've already got $75,000 appropriated for 2 trucks or 1. And what was the other?
Down the road, a tractor.
So those are the capital improvement plans we've been working on. Now the water 5-year forecast, we're projecting $300,000 in deficits for 16, $368 in 17, $400,000 in 18, and $433 in 19. So we're going to be starting off with deficits starting next year.
And just, Andy, just if you'd stay on that just for a second, just go back. I just want to make it clear that sewer forecast
Water forecast.
Water forecast, yeah. That is based on the current rate structure.
Correct.
This isn't with, this is if you didn't do anything.
That's correct. We haven't assumed any rate increases in these forecasts. Sewer, we should be all right in 15 and 16. 17, we have a $59,000 deficit. 18, will go up to $1 million, and that's when the wastewater treatment plant will kick in. And then $500,000 in 19.
Okay, so that gives you a scenario in terms of the projected deficits, which is the baseline for which we had a consultant take a look at analyzing the current rate structures, the current analysis of how we bill for water and sewer and what we charge for the different components. The next slide shows the different components of water and sewer. If we start with the water, the most basic charge is the customer charges. There are also other costs which are included, which were included in the report that the selectmen got earlier. And these charges, of course, vary by the number of bills and the size of the meter. And we're not recommending changing billing along those lines. There is also there's an extensive amount of work done by the consultant relative to fire service charges. The town really in the past had not, according to our consultant, paid as close attention to the availability of fire service charges as we needed to. His estimate was that the total cost of water, 25% of that cost could be legitimately attributed to fire service charges, and we were dramatically undercounting the cost of that. Then there is the private fire service charges, which have to do with private sprinkler systems, private hydrants. This has come into play particularly with the growth of private condominium associations who are not paying, according to what the consultant has determined, anywhere near the actual cost of what the town is providing for them in terms of fire service. And then the last component of that is the meter rate. The difference between the meter rate and the customer base charge, which is the very first bullet, is the customer base charge is primarily determined by the fixed cost component of the rates. And this will be a good time for me to mention that according to the estimate that was provided by Andy, which was gone over by the committee, 93% of a water enterprise fund budget is comprised of fixed charges, which don't change no matter how many consumers there are. Those are fixed costs. And on the sewer side, which we'll get to in a minute, it's estimated it's 90%. So the vast bulk of the charge is in what's called the base charge. The meter rates, of course, that revenue fluctuates by consumption, which is a very, very small component of the total. When you come to sewer rates, the consultant looked at the current EQR rate versus tying the sewer rates to water consumption, which is called a use-based charge. And as you'll see later in the analysis, he recommends that we retain the EQR basis for sewer charges. The last thing that the committee decided was whether they would recommend a rate increase that was multiple years of an increase or one rate increase up front and then no increase for the next 4 years. And based upon the consultant's numbers, the committee determined that the best thing to do, which of course is up to the board to decide, is an initial increase and then no increase through the end of fiscal 19, which will be 4.5 calendar years from now, or 4 fiscal years from now. So that's the recommendation of the committee, which of course is subject to discussion by the board. The next page starts to lay out the recommendation of the consultant with regard to the rates, the variable meter rate for water per 1,000 gallons is currently $3.37. The proposed rate, which would increase under the consultant's proposal in January of 2015 and then not increase for the next 4 years after that, would be $4.16. And then you can see the breakouts by the size of meters for all of the various types of accounts. The vast majority of residential users have 5/8 meters, which is the lowest rate. On the next page, you'll see the proposed seasonal charges, which are different, as everybody knows, from the monthly meter charges that are paid by the year-round consumers. The proposal, starting with the 5/8 meters, would be for an increase from $313.59, starting in January to $328. And then, again, that rate not to increase for 4 years. On the next slide, we get into the issue of the proposed private fire charges, and Don may have to chime in here because he understands this issue better than I do. Basically, private fire charges are charges that are the services are only provided to a select number of customers. It requires the capacity to deliver large volumes of water on a 24-hour basis. And as I mentioned earlier, the consultant determined that the current charges for private fire hydrants and sprinkler heads and private fire hose connections is really only recovering 1/3 of the actual cost to the town of providing that service for these private entities. So as you can see, he's recommending some rather dramatic increases in the proposed fire service charges for private fire. And he's recommended these increases, unlike the recommendation for the rates for everybody else, be actually phased in and increases over the next 5 years, as opposed to the other recommendation, which is an increase up front and then no increase for 4 years. So as you can see, these are rather dramatic increases, but they're based on the consultant's determination that we are really only recovering 1/3 of the actual true cost of providing this water for the limited number of people that get private fire service through hydrants and sprinkler heads and fire hose connections. Moving ahead to sewer, based on the projections for the deficits that Andy mentioned, the consultant is recommending an increase in the amount for EQRs per month from $30 to $40, which by quarter would translate from $90 to a $120 increase per quarter. Then he addressed the issue of why the recommendation for the sewer rates was to remain with the EQR system and not tie it to water consumption. And as you can see from the bullet points here, he based it on 4 basic principles. 1, water use is not equal to wastewater discharge. Secondly, winter use is hard to implement in a seasonal community. Third, the costs are essentially fixed. As I mentioned, at least 90% of the costs are fixed, no matter whether people are here or not here, or flushing their toilets or not flushing their toilets. The cost to recover the amount of money necessary to run the system remains relatively the same. And also, no matter how many people are here, it's essential for the town to make sure the system is running at full capacity in case it's needed for fire protection or anything else, so that people are here or are away for the winter. So he is recommending that the EQR system remain in place. If you move to the next slide, in dollar amounts, this is the proposed impact of monthly rates for water consumption. If you look at the 5/8 meter, 1, 2, 3, 4th line down, which is the average consumption per day, 200 gallons a day for the average residential home, the recommended charge comes out to approximately, the recommendation comes out to approximately an $8 per month increase in water. And the other numbers change accordingly. Of course, if you use less water, that number goes down. But for the average single-family home using 200 gallons a day, it would be about $8 per month. Likewise, with the sewer on the next chart, as excuse me, on the next page. The impact monthly on the rates for sewer, if you had a single-family home, would be $10 per month. And it would change, of course, depending upon the number of EQRs that you have. And then lastly, with regard to a comparison to other communities, we asked the consultant to look at communities that were in roughly the same geographic area as Salisbury, as well as some communities that had seasonal populations, some of which are at the Cape, as you notice on here. You will notice that some of these charges, for example, Georgetown only has water and doesn't have a sewer charge. Some of the other communities subsidize their water and sewer rates on the tax rate, and so it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. But you'll see that what Salisbury's current charges are falls probably in the lower third of the spectrum, and under the recommendation from the consultant falls approximately halfway between the lowest community and the highest, just by measure of comparison. So that's a basic brief overview of the consultant's recommendation. The report of the consultant was given to the selectmen prior to the last meeting. The selectmen had the workshop, as was mentioned, and unfortunately the consultant couldn't be here. I'm going to rely on Dawn to answer any technical questions relative, particularly to the private fire hydrant issue, and a few others, and Andy can assist on any budget questions.
So this is at the time that the public gets their input. What I would ask is that I would ask you to come to the podium when you recognize, giving us your name and your address, your residential address. I would like to first ask people who are residents and property owners to speak. Then we can go to people who are not residents but are property owners. And we'd like to try to ask questions. I'd like to try to keep it, each speaker going no more than 3 minutes with one shot, and if we get through everyone, I can come back and give someone a second opportunity, okay? So, I'm sorry, Paul, she beat you up with your hand. You're second, Paul.
Thank
Yes,
you.
go right ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I unfortunately have to leave this meeting to go to another meeting. However, I am a homeowner.
Name and address.
My name is Paula Waterman, 140 Railroad Avenue, also landowner at 70 Brissett Avenue, which is a vacant property. Also has a burn down, which could have been a duplex property. There's no water to the property. Been burned down long before I bought the property, okay? So anyway, not only as a homeowner who has water and sewage currently to the property, I'm also a real estate agent. My question is, why am I paying sewer charges to basically a non-usable, non-functioning lot? And that is my question. Now that realizing I have a concept of why companies or cities or whatever have to increase usage for any reason. I understand that. But 24% is a huge increase. Don't know if Salisbury in general is the target or Salisbury Beach is the target. Not understanding that portion of it. But again, I own a vacant, buildable lot that I pay water and sewer fees to. That's not usable. It has not been usable. And if somebody can explain that to me, generally, I understand it's a buildable property, but there is no usage of water or sewer to that piece of land. And I'm sure there are other people here that might have that same general question. So to increase fees to a vacant, non-usable property, although it's a buildable property, is a huge concern to me. And as a realtor, I would like to explain that to other people that come forward to me and explain that same question to them. I have no answers.
Any other questions other than that?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You may be seated and we'll get,
Don can probably answer it better than I can, but my understanding is that, first of all, as I mentioned before, water and sewer cost